Two boys met in 1953 at a school talent show in Queens, New York. By 1970, they had become the most famous music duo in the world. But then, something happened. One of them said something so hurtful that it changed everything. It wasn't about music or money, but it destroyed their trust. For the next 10 years, they performed together on stage, singing in perfect harmony, but backstage, they didn't even talk. One of them secretly recorded 30 solo songs without telling the other. The other erased parts of songs without permission. In 2015, one of them publicly called the other a monster in an interview. That was the final break. They didn't speak for the next 9 years. This is the story of how two childhood friends slowly turned into enemies. Paul Simon was born on October 13, 1941, in Newark, New Jersey. His family were Hungarian Jews. His mother, Belle, worked as a teacher in an elementary school. His father, Louis, was a college professor during the day and a bass player in dance bands at night. He performed using the name Lee Sims. Their house was filled with books and music. Paul grew up with structure, culture, and rhythm. His mother took him to synagogue, and his father took him to baseball games at Yankee Stadium. Watching players like Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio wasn't just about baseball for Paul. It was about seeing heroes. He later even mentioned DiMaggio in the song Mrs. Robinson. In 1945, when Paul was 4 years old, his family moved to Queens, to a neighborhood called Kew Gardens Hills. That move changed his life. It wasn't just a new house. It was a completely new environment. The family stayed up late watching Paul's dad perform on television shows like The Jackie Gleason Show. Seeing his dad go from teacher to performer made a big impression. Paul realized music wasn't just fun. It could be a career and a way to express who you are. The new neighborhood had many Jewish families who loved music and cared about education. Paul listened to everything he could: jazz, folk songs by Woody Guthrie, and the rough blues of Lead Belly. These sounds helped shape how he saw the world. In 1953, when Paul was 11, he saw a boy sing alone on stage during a school talent show. That boy was Art Garfunkel. A girl sitting nearby whispered how good Art's voice was, and that stuck with Paul. He wasn't just interested in music. He now saw it as a way to impress people, especially girls. Later that year, Paul and Art both acted in a school play of Alice in Wonderland. It was just a 6th grade graduation performance, but it marked the start of their musical journey together. Their voices blended so well it seemed like fate. They formed a small music group called the Peptones and performed at school events and block parties. Paul started writing songs early. By the time he was 13, he had already written their first original song. By 15, they had become more than just classmates. They were recording artists. In 1957, under the fake names Tom and Jerry, they recorded a song called Hey Schoolgirl, which they wrote while trying to remember the lyrics of another song. They paid $25, an enormous amount for kids at the time, to record a demo. A promoter named Sid Prozen heard it and signed them. Paul became Jerry Landis, and Art became Tom Graff. Their song reached number 49 on the Billboard chart and sold over 100,000 copies. They even appeared on American Bandstand. They were only 15, but they were already famous. But even in those early days, problems were starting. Paul had written their first song, The Girl for Me, when he was just 12 or 13. His father even helped him write down the chords and lyrics. This paper is now kept in the Library of Congress. Art had the stronger voice, but Paul was the songwriter and the one with ambition. From the beginning, Paul was the one creating while Art was mostly performing. This imbalance caused tension, and it only grew over time. From 1957 to 1964, Paul secretly worked on his own music career. Even though he was still working with Art, he recorded more than 30 songs using fake names like Jerry Landis, Paul Kane, and True Taylor. He worked with many different record labels and wasn't just singing. He was also writing and producing songs for other artists. In 1962, he was already producing music for other singers and bands. Paul's first solo single as True Taylor was released in 1958, just months after Hey Schoolgirl became a hit. He even started getting solo offers from their promoter, Sid Prozen, without telling Art. Art later said that finding out about Paul's secret solo career was deeply painful. He called it a betrayal and said it permanently damaged their friendship. While Art still believed in their partnership, Paul was already thinking of moving on alone. Paul's solo career was modest but successful. In 1962, with a new group called Tico and the Triumphs, he released Motorcycle, which made it to number 99 on the charts. At the same time, he released The Lone Teen Ranger under the name Jerry Landis, and it charted at number 97. These songs weren't huge hits, but they proved that Paul could succeed without Art. He often sang lead vocals and controlled things behind the scenes, sometimes using other people as the public face of the group. In 1958, the two drifted apart. It wasn't a dramatic breakup, they just stopped working together. But the emotional damage was deep. They didn't reconnect until 1963, 5 years later. During that time, Paul kept recording music under different names, while Art tried to make it on his own, with less success. They didn't reunite because they missed each other. They were both struggling. Paul had a job pitching songs to record companies, trying to get someone to buy his music. One of his songs, He Was My Brother, caught the attention of producer Tom Wilson at Columbia Records. But Wilson didn't want Paul. He wanted the song for a British group. Paul acted quickly. He convinced Wilson to give him and Art a single studio audition. They sang The Sound of Silence. Wilson, who had worked with great musicians like Miles Davis, was amazed by Paul's lyrics and Art's pure voice. That one audition got them a real recording contract. And just like that, their second act as Simon and Garfunkel began. For the first time, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel used their real names on a record. But their problems were just getting started. Their first official album, Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., came out in October 1964 and was a complete failure. It sold only about 1,000 copies in the first 8 months. By then, music was changing fast. Folk music, which the album focused on, suddenly felt old-fashioned. The Beatles had taken over, and Columbia Records tried to promote Simon and Garfunkel as a traditional folk act at exactly the wrong time. The reviews weren't good, and the sales were even worse. Disappointed, they went their separate ways again. Paul moved to England, playing in small clubs and writing songs alone. During that time, he recorded a solo album called the Paul Simon Songbook. Art, meanwhile, stayed in New York and went back to school at Columbia University. They didn't realize it yet, but many of the songs Paul wrote during that quiet, lonely time would later become big hits. Then something unexpected happened in 1965. Without telling either of them, their producer Tom Wilson took the song The Sound of Silence, added electric guitars and drums, and released it again. He did it right after working on Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone sessions. He didn't ask for permission. He just put it out. The new version started getting radio play in cities like Boston and Miami. Paul found out in the strangest way. He was in Denmark, performing, and read about it in Billboard magazine. By January 1, 1966, the song was #1 in America. Art called Paul to celebrate. Paul was surprised, and not completely happy. He didn't like how the remix had changed the rhythm. But even though he had mixed feelings, he couldn't ignore the success. They rushed to reunite and record a second album to take advantage of the moment. But by then, Paul had changed. He wanted full creative control. While recording Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, Paul took charge of nearly everything. He decided on the instruments, the arrangements, and spent long hours in the studio. Many of the songs came directly from the ones he wrote while living in England. Art mostly just showed up to sing. That album became a big hit, reaching #4 on the Billboard charts and selling millions of copies. But behind the scenes, the partnership was becoming more unbalanced. Paul saw himself as the creative force behind the music. Art was just the voice. That feeling only grew stronger. In 1967, director Mike Nichols used their music in his film The Graduate. It introduced Simon and Garfunkel to a much wider audience. The song Mrs. Robinson wasn't even finished when the film was released, but it still became a massive hit. The film's soundtrack went to #1. Their next album, Bookends, also topped the charts and stayed there for 16 weeks. They even won Record of the Year at the Grammys. But with all that success came more tension. Paul started feeling like Art was getting more credit than he deserved. Many fans assumed Art wrote the songs. Paul was the one writing them, but Art was the one getting applause. Their manager put it best: each one secretly wished they were the other. Paul was also dealing with personal insecurity. Art was taller, more photogenic, and once even joked, "I'll always be taller than you." Paul never forgot it. That joke hurt and stuck with him for decades. Then came the event that broke everything apart. Mike Nichols, the same director who made The Graduate, invited them both to act in his new movie Catch 22. They were both cast, but later Paul's part was cut from the film. Art kept his role. Paul was deeply embarrassed. Art left for Mexico to shoot the movie, and Paul stayed behind in New York. That distance between them created a deeper crack. Paul thought they would continue writing and recording music while Art was filming, but instead, Art was gone for almost a full year. What was supposed to be 6 weeks turned into 12 months. Their next album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, had to be made in 2 long recording sessions. One in November 1968, and another a full year later. During that gap, Paul waited. Big cultural events like Woodstock came and went, and they weren't able to perform. Art was still away filming. Paul kept working, but it wasn't the same. Their usual creative process, sitting together, bouncing ideas off one another in real time, was gone. Now, Art wanted Paul to send demo tapes to Mexico. Art would listen and call with feedback, saying things like, "No, that part's no good." Paul felt like an assistant. He wasn't used to working that way and felt humiliated. Then Art made a comment that ended everything. He told Paul, "Here's how it'll be. I'll go make movies for 6 months, then I'll come back, and you'll have written the songs, and we'll record them." Paul said no. He wasn't just turning down a plan. He was rejecting the idea that he would be someone else's songwriter. He had always been the one writing the music, producing the sessions, and crafting the sound. But Art was the one fans cheered for. Especially when Art sang the title track Bridge Over Troubled Water at concerts, the audience would erupt with applause, and Paul would just stand off to the side thinking, "That's my song." The final recording sessions for Bridge Over Troubled Water were sad and lonely. Paul worked alone with the producer and musicians. Art was in Mexico. Even the instrumental tracks were recorded in California to make travel easier for Art. When it came time to record the vocals for the song Bridge Over Troubled Water, Art sang it solo, and he was the one who got the standing ovations. That album became their biggest hit, and also their last. When they finally broke up in 1970, most people thought Paul Simon would bounce back quickly. After all, their last album had just spent 6 weeks at #1 around the world. But inside, Paul was scared. He worried about whether he could succeed on his own. That fear made him push himself harder. In January 1972, Paul released his first solo album, simply titled Paul Simon. One of the songs, Mother and Child Reunion, was inspired by a dish he saw on a menu, chicken and eggs served together. But what really stood out was the sound. Paul had traveled to Kingston, Jamaica, and recorded the song in a reggae style with Jimmy Cliff's band. It was a big risk, but it worked. The song became a top 5 hit in both the US and the UK. Paul had finally proven that he could make it on his own. Another track from Paul Simon, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, reached number 22 on the charts and confirmed that Paul could still write catchy, story-driven songs. The album itself climbed to number 4 in the US and even topped the charts in the UK and Japan, a major international success. By 1973, Paul was on a roll. He released There Goes Rhymin' Simon, a bold, confident album that showed him stretching creatively. He experimented with different genres and instruments, drawing on gospel, pop, and even Brazilian influences. The single Kodachrome became a standout hit, peaking at number 2. Using photography as a metaphor, The song captured the bittersweet way memories color our lives. Another track, Loves Me Like a Rock, topped the Cashbox charts and featured backing vocals by the legendary gospel group the Dixie Hummingbirds, a first for Simon. Then there was American Tune, which, though not a chart topper, struck an emotional chord with its somber reflection on post-Vietnam American disillusionment. The melody came from a Bach composition, but the lyrics felt deeply rooted in the national mood. The album hit #1 on Cashbox. 2 years later, in 1975, Paul released Still Crazy After All These Years, perhaps his most emotionally complex and introspective work. He had recently divorced Peggy Harper, and the pain showed. The album wrestled with themes of loneliness, aging, and regret. It was a critical and commercial success, reaching #1 on the Billboard charts and winning Album of the Year at the Grammys. Paul also won Best Male Pop Vocal Performance. The biggest single, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, was his first #1 solo hit and stayed at the top of the charts for 3 weeks in early 1976. The record also featured My Little Town, a surprise reunion song with Art Garfunkel that reached #9. But despite the reunion, the emotional gap between the two remained. Paul's personal life, however, was growing more turbulent. In 1983, he married Carrie Fisher. Yes, that Carrie Fisher, the actress famous for playing Princess Leia. Their relationship had begun during the peak of Star Wars fame, and while their love was real, their lifestyles weren't a great match. Paul was in the middle of a reunion tour with Garfunkel, and marrying Carrie in that chaotic time only made things harder. In a 2024 documentary, Paul admitted the marriage was exhausting. Carrie thrived in the public eye and knew how to handle the spotlight. Paul never got comfortable with it. He wasn't built for fame the way she was. He later said life with Carrie felt like living in a media circus. The marriage lasted only 11 months, but its emotional impact was lasting. Both were at the height of their careers. Paul's music was everywhere, and Carrie was still a fixture in Hollywood. Even Paul's best man, Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels, described the marriage as a storm. Carrie's mood swings, her struggles with addiction, and her constant engagement with fame wore Paul down. After the divorce, Paul was left emotionally drained. That sense of unraveling came through clearly in his 1983 album Hearts and Bones. It was his most personal work to date, vulnerable, poetic, and introspective. Critics praised the album, but commercially, it flopped. Fans didn't connect with its depth, at least not at the time. Looking back, Hearts and Bones now feels like one of his most underrated efforts, a quiet masterpiece buried under the noise of public expectations and personal pain. Meanwhile, Paul's fame and wealth brought a different kind of pressure. The marriage had been lived on tour buses, in 5-star hotels, and under a constant stream of flashbulbs. Lorne Michaels said it felt like being trapped in a dream. To Carrie, it was exciting. To Paul, it was suffocating. He later said he felt like he was playing a role just to survive. Eventually, Paul settled into a much quieter life. In 1992, he married Edie Brickell, a singer-songwriter known for her hit, What I Am. They had 3 children and managed to stay mostly out of the public eye. But controversy wasn't done with him. In 1985, Paul traveled to apartheid-era South Africa to record with local musicians. At the time, the United Nations had imposed a strict cultural boycott on the regime. Artists around the world were expected to steer clear as a form of protest. But Paul went anyway. He spent 9 days in Soweto recording with South African musicians, often under curfew and threat of police interference. To his credit, Paul paid the musicians $200 an hour, more than triple what New York session musicians earned, and far above the local rate of $15 a day. Still, activists saw his visit as a betrayal. The backlash was immediate. Ghana's UN ambassador accused him of legitimizing apartheid just by showing up. Protests followed Paul across Europe. He was picketed in London and Birmingham. Some musicians condemned his actions. And when Graceland, the album that came out of those sessions, was released, controversy followed him everywhere. Then came an entirely different scandal, this time about credit. Steve Berlin of the band Los Lobos claimed that Paul had stolen one of their songs. According to Berlin, Paul showed up to a session with no material and asked them to jam. They did. Later, a version of that jam appeared on the Graceland album, with no credit to Los Lobos. Berlin said when they protested, Paul replied dismissively, "Sue me. See what happens." Paul denied the accusation, but Los Lobos insisted they were never compensated or acknowledged. There were more credit disputes too, especially from African musicians. Some stood by Paul, but others felt taken advantage of. South African jazz legend Jonas Gwangwa put it bluntly, "So it takes another white man to discover my people." It was a painful and honest critique. Paul had paid the musicians well and promised royalties, but many felt he still held too much control over how their work was presented. Through it all, Paul refused to apologize. He believed the music was worth the risk, and Graceland would go on to become one of his greatest artistic achievements, both musically and culturally. But the path to that success was anything but smooth. Paul Simon always believed music spoke louder than politics. When he broke the UN's cultural boycott and recorded Graceland in apartheid-era South Africa, he said, "The music itself was the protest." He didn't write political lyrics. Instead, he saw the collaboration between black South African musicians and a white American artist as the message. But defying the African National Congress, ANC, and admitting, "I didn't ask permission," sparked outrage. The UN blacklisted him. South Africa banned him. Even after the UN cleared his name in 1987, the backlash lingered. Artists like Billy Bragg and Jerry Dammers protested his performances for years afterward. Yet long before that controversy, Simon was chasing something just as elusive, the harmony he once shared with Art Garfunkel. Their relationship was complex, part friendship, part rivalry, and ultimately, a tragic arc. After their 1970 split, they barely spoke. But a surprise meeting in 1975, while recording with John Lennon and Harry Nilsson, rekindled a spark. They tried again. The result was just one song, My Little Town, which ended up on both their solo albums, not a joint one, a symbolic gesture that foreshadowed how much distance remained between them. Then came the high. On September 19, 1981, Simon and Garfunkel performed in Central Park to over 500,000 people. The concert became historic, an HBO special, a double platinum album, and a brief cultural rebirth. Their old songs climbed the charts again. But the reunion tour in 1982 exposed the cracks. They weren't talking off stage. Perfect harmonies in public masked total silence in private. In 1983, things fell apart completely. They had begun work on Think Too Much, what was supposed to be their first studio album since Bridge Over Troubled Water. Garfunkel laid down vocals, joined the process fully, but Simon pulled back. The songs were too personal, especially one about Carrie Fisher. He re-recorded everything alone, renamed the album Hearts and Bones, and erased Garfunkel without warning. Garfunkel later called it a betrayal. From that moment, they were musically finished. In 2010, one last tour was planned. Garfunkel developed vocal cord paralysis, and it was cancelled. Simon suspected Garfunkel hadn't been honest about how serious it was. That thin thread of trust finally snapped. By 2015, the wounds resurfaced publicly. Garfunkel, in a bitter interview, called Simon a jerk and an idiot for leaving the duo in 1970. The most vicious line? That compensation gesture created a monster. He said he'd befriended Simon in school out of pity for his height. When asked if Simon had a Napoleon complex, Garfunkel didn't hesitate. Yes. He even quoted George Harrison, "My Paul is to me what your Paul is to you." The Pauls sidelined us. It stung. Simon stayed quiet until 2016, when he said bluntly, "We don't get along. It's not fun. No warmth. No nostalgia. Just finality." By 2018, Simon was openly talking about retirement. "I haven't written a new song in a couple of years. I'm finished." Their creative fire was gone. And so was the friendship. From 2015 to 2024, they didn't speak. Not once. No emails. No calls. Just silence. Two men who had shaped each other's lives, now strangers. The silence broke by chance. In 2024, Garfunkel ran into Simon's son, Harper, in their building. That led to a quiet lunch. Garfunkel asked, "What happened?" Simon replied simply, "An old interview. You said some stuff." By then, Simon was facing battles of his own. In 2023, he released 7 Psalms, a stripped-down, 33-minute acoustic album. He called it his most personal work, but behind it lay devastating news. After COVID-19 in 2022, he lost nearly all hearing in his left ear. Doctors couldn't explain it. He said, "I can't sing You Can Call Me Al anymore. That's gone." It was a heartbreaking admission from a man whose life had been built on melody and voice. In a November 2024 interview, Simon confessed that he now lived in 2 kinds of silence. One in his ear, the other between him and the only person who had truly shared his rise. It's frustrating. It's angry-making. It's like being trapped. Their story had started in the schoolrooms of Queens, 2 kids singing into a microphone. Together they had made history. But time, pride, and pain had driven them apart. Now, in their 70s and 80s, the harmony was gone. The friendship too. What remained was silence, louder than any note they ever sang.